Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 7. This video is part of a series of videos where I cover every single solitary episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one season at a time. In this video will be my final season that will be covered, Season 7 of Deep Space Nine, where I'm going to quickly walk through every single episode of Season 7 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and give my review. So anyway, Season 7 I think is actually one of the better seasons of Deep Space Nine. I've heard some mixed opinions on this. I heard some people saying we kind of lost a bit of quality, and indeed it wasn't as good as Season 6, but Season 6 was so great I can't really put too much blame on it there. Now, Season 7's an odd one because I would actually say the first half of the season was... I wouldn't say the first half of the season was all bad. There were a few great episodes in there, but it was kind of meh. It was a bit hit or miss. It had a lot of mediocre episodes, a couple really bad episodes. So I'd say the first half of the season is just averagely good, but the second half of the season was amazing. I mean, amazing. And maybe my opinion is actually a lot higher on this than most people. But Deep Space Nine Season 7 had a 10-episode, if you count the finale as 2 episodes, a 10-episode story arc that closed out the show. And I love this story arc so much. I don't think every episode in it is amazing. There's some okay episodes in it, but they all contribute to the whole. It's all one serialized story. Now, Deep Space Nine first did this with Season 6, where they opened Season 6 with the 6-episode story arc that actually continued off of Call to Arms, the Season 5 finale. So arguably it was a 7-episode story arc of the Dominion Cardassian Alliance taking over the station. But, you know, they hadn't really done anything since then, and so I was hoping when Season 7 was airing that they would do this. And I remember because at the time when Season 7 was airing, I was busy living my life, and I actually missed a couple of these episodes when they first aired, or would, you know, just barely watch it close, not really paying attention. And I saw this commercial for like, oh, the end is coming. And so I watched it, and it just so happened to be the first episode of the 10-episode story arc. And I recorded it, and I recorded each of the 10 episodes, and I was so happy that I actually caught it. That I actually caught the whole story arc, because, you know, I missed episodes here and there in Season 7. It was kind of okay because they were mostly standalones, but I'm so glad that I didn't miss anything in this like continuous story arc, that I was able to watch it from start to finish and record it, so I would actually watch the episodes more than once. Yeah, I remember this is back in the late 90s, and I remember being so hyped, so excited. And I know some people were making fun of the commercials. If you, maybe if you didn't watch it while it was airing, you might not be aware, but every week they had a commercial, like, in 5 weeks or however many weeks it was, Deep Space Nine, a saga comes to the end, and they like really glorified it. And it's funny because when the Voyager ended, even they didn't glorify it as much. And Voyager was notorious for having these, I talked about this in my Voyager reviews, how they were notorious for having these over-glorification, commercials and stuff. But that's probably because the Voyager finale sucked, so they knew not to hype it where this was great. I love and I love that they took this risk, because as I mentioned, it was hard enough for them to do the 6-episode story arc in Season 6. That was like, they had to fight the studio, they had to fight the producers, because they want Star Trek to be episodic, but they managed to do it, and people loved it so much that they were able to do it again for an even longer period of time. And they did it to close out the show. Now, I can imagine, like, I haven't read anything specific, but I can imagine how many people are against this, because that means the final episode of the show, which typically, like, mainly compared to Next Generation, which had all good things, typically you would think a final episode of the show would be more standalone, because you can make a novel out of it, and you can say, oh, this is final episode, and you assume, like, like a lot of people would just tune in for the final episode, not necessarily seeing anything before it. And they actually took a huge risk by having this final episode be basically just part 10 of a 10-parter. But, I mean, some might argue it was somewhat standalone. They tried to catch up on all the things that happened before it. And most of the stuff that happened in the previous episodes were just wrapping up the story. But they did do like a standalone novel, so they did try to make it somewhat standalone, but really it wasn't. Now, I kind of wish that the whole season would have been serialized, not just 10 episodes, that they would have just started from the beginning and did a entire season-long story arc about the Dominion. But, you know, I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure, you know, I can assume, I can guess that from what I hear about what happened in season 6, that the studio fought them on that, and the best that they could get away with was 10 episodes. Now, and as I said, the first half mainly were standalone episodes. There were a few building blocks here and there, but hit and miss. It wasn't really that good. And of course, you get the introduction of Ezri Dax, which it is a bit ridiculous that they had to introduce a new Dax just for one season. But I talked about in season 6 that Terry Farrell just left the show, so what are they gonna do? I mean, they could just not have a Dax, but I think it makes more sense to have a Dax. But that a lot of the first half of the season was about introducing this character and fleshing her out more and giving her backstory, which is, you know, what you want to do when you have a new character, but this is the final season. So it seems kind of weird that so much of the final season was spent on introducing a character when the show's about to end. But anyway, let me go ahead and get into the episodes. Let's start with the premiere, and I'm actually going to do this as a two-parter. I'll do both parts in one go, and that is Image in the Sand and Shadows and Symbols. Now, when I did a review for this on my channel, I actually included all 3 episodes, Tears of the Prophets, Image in the Sand, Shadows and Symbols, and called it a 3-parter. But really, it's kind of just a 2-parter that takes off where Tears of the Prophets lets off, because Tears of the Prophets was pretty standalone, actually. Other than like leaving the cliffhanger of Sisko going to peel potatoes and Jadzia dying, it's kind of standalone. Whereas Image in the Sand and Shadows and Symbols, this is one story told over 2 episodes, or more accurately 3 stories that are like intercut, told over 2 episodes. So really it's stretched out over 2 episodes, so it's very clear 2-parter. So that's why I review these 2 together. And I would say, like, so let me do, as I said, there's several different stories in this. There's the Worf dealing with Jadzia's death, which is great. I think they had to have that story. And then, you know, Bashir and O'Brien and Quark going to help him honor Jadzia, basically. And then there's a storyline with the Romulans coming to Deep Space Nine and Kira not liking that, and then end up liking her, but then finds out that she's defying the Bajorans, and so she puts a blockade that there's no way it could do any good, but she bluffs. And then there's a storyline with Sisko back on Earth with his father and Jake, and he gets these visions about the prophets, and then Ezra comes in and they go on this quest to a planet called Tyree, which, how did he recognize Tyree just from that vision? That looked like the desert of California to me. How did he know it was Tyree? But anyway, it's like, oh, I had a vision of Tyree. How the hell do you know it was Tyree, Benjamin? But anyway, and there's some good and bad in all 3 storylines, I think. I don't know. I don't think I have a particular favorite or least favorite. I think they both have their positives and negatives. As I said, the war thing was great that they dealt with. They dealt with the death of Jadzia. They just didn't like magic wand it away. It was important because they built up the relationship with her and Worf so much in season 6. It was important to give some closure to this. The whole thing about getting her into Sto-vo-kor was a bit ridiculous, and like, what the hell was Quark doing on the Klingon ship? I can't get over that. He was just sitting there being annoying. Like, Chief O'Brien was actually doing all the work, and Bashir, he helped out a tad bit, but Quark was just whining, and they even said, what are you going to do, serve drinks? And, like, some of the interactions between Quark and Worf were just, it's painful. It's like they were trying to artificially create tension between them to give a story resolution, and Worf, like, really unfairly, like, didn't make any sense that when Quark was being a dick, he all of a sudden lumped Bashir and O'Brien in that same group and acted like they were all being a dick to him, when really it's just Quark. So, and the whole thing about destroying the Dominion shipyards, blah, 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 who cares? Also, I gotta mention, there was kind of another storyline as well, and there was also Damar and Weyoun, and their appearances in these 2 episodes were really bad. It's like they just have them pop up to give commentary. Oh, they're trying to destroy the shipyards. Oh, the Romulans and Bajorans are fighting. Oh, and there's like, he's like basically, he's not the leader of the Dominion, but he's basically in charge of the Dominion troops. He's like the general, shall we say, and the founders are like the government or the president or whatever, and he's like the general in charge. And Damar is the leader of Cardassia. They wouldn't be sitting there giving commentary on what these people from Deep Space Nine are doing. It was so obvious. It was like, ooh, it was just trying to fit into what the main characters of this TV show were doing. It was really bad. It was really annoying. Thankfully, what they did, Damar and Weyoun, later in the season got better, but for these 2 episodes, they just put them in there just to put them in there. And then there's the stuff with the Kira and the Romulans. Like, the whole thing was just okay, I think. It was a bit silly how Kira just was like, oh, I hate the Romulans. Why are you having the Romulans come here? I'm very much against it. And then they're friends and like, oh, actually, she's really cool. We get along. And then all of a sudden they're fighting again. I did kind of like the gambit of Kira bluffing her way, and then when she saw the wormhole reopen, that she stopped bluffing. She's like, I don't care. She got that, like, punch of, like, that power punch of, like, faith, where she's like, fuck it, I'm going all in. So that was really good. I did like that. I mean, it was kind of, the whole storyline wasn't, like, great or anything, though. It was kind of okay. And then you got the Sisko stuff. Okay. Alright. Maybe I'm more negative on this now I'm thinking about this than the other storylines. Because I did really like the interactions between Benjamin and his family, and we got a really great Avery Brooks overacting moment when he was asking his dad about the woman in his vision, and he like, grabs him by the shoulder and shakes him. It's like, who is she? I have to know! And I'm like, that was beautiful. And Ezri was actually a really good companion to the storyline as well. I liked her introduction here. I liked her babbling and explaining that she wasn't fit to be joined. She was just the only Trill there. Like, all that was cool. What I didn't like so much, okay, first of all, the Orb of the Emissary. Really? Give me a fucking break. Secondly, alright, I'm going to save the whole thing about the mother for last, because I really got to get into that. But secondly, that when they're on the planet, he's digging up the orb, and he starts having the visions of, like, back the Far Beyond the Stars episode from season 6, where he's like Benny Russell in the 60s. He has visions of that, except it's Damar, because, hey, Damar's actor wasn't in that episode. So let's have a scene. It was just like, that was a very cheap way to try to call back to that episode, or try to recapture that episode, or try to do a sequel to the episode. And I was kind of sketchy, even on that episode. I know a lot of people love it. I think it was a really good episode as well. But I was really sketchy even on that episode about the logic of why the prophets would give him a vision of the 60s. Here it's much worse. Here it's very contrived. It's very obvious that the writers are just trying to revisit Benny Russell. And it's actually not a very good continuation because it shows that he's gone insane. He's writing on walls. In fact, his insanity is seen as, like, celebrated. So I would have liked a happier ending for Benny Russell. But the whole thing of having the Mars actor be there, it's like, that whole thing was, and the Paul Race is sending you a false vision. Really? Then how come the vision seemed to actually help him? And then all of a sudden he stopped, like, digging up and started covering it up when Damar was telling him to erase the words on the wall. That was, oh my god. Okay, I think this is my least favorite storyline. Now, let me get to the whopper. The absolute whopper of the thing, of the revelation that Sisko's birth mother was taken over by a prophet, and the woman he thought was her mother was actually his adopted mother. That his father was with another woman before he was born, before he was with the woman he thought of as her mother, and that was his actual mother. And they find out that she was a prophet, took over her body and forced, and had her, mate with Joseph Sisko so they could purposely give birth to Benjamin. So basically it's saying the prophets put forth in motion Benjamin's birth, his creation. Like, that's probably the biggest fucking retcon this show has ever done. You go back and you watch the first episode of Emissary. The prophets have been established by the way, as being outside of linear time, so they know the past, present, and future. So if this is true, they wouldn't be like, oh, we don't understand corporeal life, we don't know who you are, we're going to kill you, we're going to destroy you, because corporeal life is... And I know the obvious excuse for that I'm probably going to hear is, oh, well, they were just pretending because they didn't want Sisko to know. No, I don't buy that in the least. Not the slightest, but this is obviously just retconning. And as I said, as much as I love Deep Space Nine, as much as I love Iron Stephen Bear and Ronald D. Moore, their fatal flaw is just retconning things like crazy, and they don't care if it adds up. And I got it true because Ronald D. Moore is kind of iffy on the continuity as well. He as I talked about a lot, he retconned Battlestar Galactica pretty badly towards the end. So this is kind of a trait for him. So that is a flaw with this. It's not just that it doesn't add up, but just cheesy. They're trying to turn it into a fantasy where in fact, Iron Stephen Bear was very honest about this in interviews where he said he kept trying to make Sisko a god. You don't need to do that. I think this show, Deep Space Nine, is good. In fact, I would argue better without it. You don't need to make Sisko a god for the show to be good. It actually just makes it a bit cheesy. And the whole, like, Paul Wraith and Prophet conflict seemed a bit like too fantasy-esque. In fact, it has a lot of tinges of religious fantasy elements to it, and you don't need that in Deep Space Nine. I just think that's a bit cheesy. But anyway, these two episodes were good. I wouldn't say they're not good. As I said, each of the storylines had strengths and weaknesses. Even the Sisko one, I did like a lot of things in it, like the interaction, seeing how him relate to his father, and the introduction of Ezri I thought was handled very well. And I did like the other two storylines as well. So these are decent episodes. Not great. They're not like the best way to start the season, but it was okay. Anyway, let me get to the next episode, which is After Image. So... this is after Ezri was introduced in the first episode. This episode is the one that actually deals with her coming to the station and reuniting with everyone. The effect it has on people to see this different version of Dax back in their lives. And I actually really liked this episode. I thought it was handled very well. I thought it was a very good character building episode. I thought it was a necessary episode to ever going to introduce a new version of Dax to show what it's like for her to come back to the station but be a totally different person, while at the same time how others relate to her on that level, and how some people have an easier time, like Benjamin, as we saw in the previous episode, just slipped right back into it, like, oh, you're Dax. And that makes sense, because he's already actually done this. He's done this with Curzon and Jadzia, because he was good friends with Curzon, and at the start of the series we saw him getting used to a new host with Jadzia, so for him to get used to Ezri, it's like, he has practice. He's used to doing it now. Other people handle it, don't handle it quite as well. Like Bashir was actually pretty good at handling it as well for the most part. And Quark was kind of just crushing on her because she's like Jadzia, which is probably not the best way to handle it. And Odo and Kira seemed really iffy about her, but of course the person who handled it the worst was Worf, which again makes all the sense in the world, except, especially because in the previous episode he just did this thing to get Jadzia into Sto-vo-kor. Now all of a sudden there's a new person with Jadzia's memories walking around. It's very confusing for him. It's probably something he'd rather not deal with, and I think this was handled very well in this show, how he was being a dick to her. And then O'Brien, it was such a great, because I love we get these interactions, these good character moments between Worf and other characters, other than just Sisko or Jadzia or Martok. It was like, that seems to be all he relates to. But I love that because this whole thing of O'Brien coming in and drinking, they did that in the first two episodes. And I love they revisited this time, and it was so great that O'Brien was the one that got him to see that look. Do you think Jadzia would want you to be a dick to Ezri? And it made total sense. So I thought this was a pretty good character episode. I didn't think this episode was amazing or anything, don't get me wrong, but I think it was necessary for fleshing out Ezri's character, so I thought it was a pretty good episode. Okay, so let's get to the next episode, which is Take Me Out to the Holosuites, which is not a pretty good episode. It's a pretty bad episode. Now, to be fair, on this recent rewatch, my opinion of it went up slightly, but I still don't think it's a good episode. But I used to hate this episode. It's funny, because I remember, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, something, when I was, on this message board for Star Trek, and I was naming my 5 favorite and my 5 least favorite Deep Space Nine episodes, and I actually put this episode in my least favorite, and it has so many people, argue with me, why don't you like this episode? It's fun. And there's one guy, I'm not going to be name calling here, but this one guy responded to me and was like, what? Did you get picked last for the baseball teams when you were a kid or something? What the fuck does that have to do with anything? For the record, I was always picked second or third for the baseball teams, but that could not possibly be more irrelevant. It's funny. Whenever there's an episode of something that's sports related and it happens to suck, and I point out that it sucks, people are always like, oh, you just don't like the sport. No, it doesn't that I don't like the sport. It's that I don't want to see a science fiction episode where the characters are acting like idiots in order to play this sport, where they're trying to be like a baseball movie, like Bad News Bears or what the fuck ever they're trying to do, instead of having a Deep Space Nine episode about science fiction and the Cardassians' Dominion War, which is what I'd rather get, or the characters, not Sisko's freaking obsession with baseball. And the whole thing premise about the Vulcan. Now, the Vulcans in this episode are racist. They are outright racist. And maybe in the 90s it didn't come off that way as strongly as it does now. Maybe the culture has shifted. But these Vulcans are like, oh, fuck humans. Humans are all emotional. I'm going to pick on the humans in there. Because the reason why the writers did this is obvious, because they wanted to make the cliche bully stereotype that you see in most of these sports movies, or this bad ones, the bad sports movies, the bad comedies, where it's just the bullies, oh, I'm going to kick your ass because I'm better than you. And that's exactly what they did with the Vulcans, but they had to make them into racists, who are racist against not just humans, but pretty much all other species of the Federation, which really, fuck these assholes for being so racist. and it's so, but not just fuck these assholes because that's what the episode wants you to think. Oh, those guys are assholes. We're going to beat them. No, I don't buy it. It doesn't make, it's out of character for the Vulcans, and of course maybe, Enterprise took this up and ran with it because they turned the Vulcans into dicks as well. That is until Enterprise actually got good and they stopped doing that shit. But, yeah, I don't know why this push to make all Vulcans assholes, and I didn't think it worked for this episode. Now, the one thing I did that saved it from being like one of the worst episodes ever for me is the fact that I kind of did like the ending with how they didn't win, but Sisko was like treating it like a victory anyway, and they were just happy, and he was all uptight, and it was like, oh, we gotta win this baseball game, and then at the end, he just realized that he needed to let go. So it was actually a good character story for Sisko, I have to admit, even though I don't want to, and how he got Rom to go in and bunt, and it was actually some good character interactions between Rom and his family as well, but other than that, this episode was dumb. I mean, having all the main crew members being in the ops, reciting rules of baseball, and having Odo being the umpire and doing these moves, that was so cheesy. This episode was dumb. Bad episode. Anyway, let me get to the next episode, which is Chrysalis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and oh, for joy, we get the return of the genetically enhanced people I never gave a shit about that appeared in that one episode that was kind of just average. And this episode 2 is kind of just average, don't get me wrong. It doesn't suck. I did get a kick out of the whole thing at the start of the episode when Patrick was going around pretending to be an admiral, being, that's a stupid question. That was funny, I gotta admit. But the main storyline about Bashir, and again, they kind of retconned Serena's character before. They never said that her condition was medical. I mean, you kind of just assumed that it was more of a mental illness. In this episode, they treat it more as a medical condition that Bashir needs to solve. And plus, she has a romance with Bashir when really it's been established that she had a thing for, I think that dude's name was Jack, one of those genetically enhanced dudes, so she was in the institution with. Now, I know that easy counter argument to that is well, she actually didn't love Bashir, and that's what was the point of the episode, is that she just felt grateful to him for saving her, so she felt obligated to be in a romantic relationship with him, even though she didn't really want to, which, yeah, that was the point of the episode, but it doesn't change the fact that they retconned the fact. They totally didn't even bring up the fact that she had a thing for Jack. And maybe they brought up one line of dialogue saying, oh, I got over that, which is just a bullshit way so they can have their stupid plot. But, other than that, I mean, the episode, as I said, it's not horrible because it was somewhat interesting that the concept of Serena not being in love with Bashir, but feeling obligated to be in a relationship with him because she felt grateful. That was an interesting concept. But the whole, you know how I feel about this whole genetically enhanced thing. I was never on board with it. I'm still not on board with it. I got a comment the other day of someone saying that it saved Bashir's character and made him more interesting. No, it didn't. It was a gimmick. It was very gimmicky. I don't think it made his character better. In fact, I would argue it made his character worse because they focused too much on this gimmick. Instead, if he was just a plain old human like he was before Season 5, then they'd have to focus more on his own characteristic, his own character stories, instead of this stupid gimmick. And those mentally, those genetically enhanced people from the institution were stereotypes from, movies about mental institutions like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They were just bland stereotypes that didn't have any sense of realism to them, so that definitely seeped into this episode again. In fact, I would say it was a bit worse, the stereotyping. So, yeah, bland episode. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Treachery, Faith, and the Great River. I had somewhat recently done a review on this episode where I covered it in greater detail. Basically, I really like the storyline with Odo and Weyoun. In fact, this probably I would have given this episode a 10 if that was the only storyline. But we had this other stupid storyline with Nog trying to like trade things up, and that storyline didn't totally suck. Don't get me wrong, but it was kind of it was kind of cheesy, and so I gave this episode a 9 instead of a 10 because of that. But I still think it is a great episode. Well, at least it's the Odo side of it was the whole thing with Weyoun defecting. I mean, it's so great. I think it's a very creative of the writers to take this element of the cloning, which of course was just introduced as an excuse to keep Jeffrey Combs on the show, and fair enough for that. After they killed off his character in his first appearance, they're like, oh fuck, we shouldn't have killed him off, we like this character so much, hey, let's just say they're clones. But I love how they took that aspect of Vorta, which was just, invented so they could keep the actor, and they did something interesting with it. I think that's very creative, and that's very good writing. In fact, they did something really interesting with it. And they introduced the element of the founder disease, which they kind of retcon later in the season, which is a shame because here the scenario they present is that Odo is going to be the only survivor and the other founders are going to die and he's going to have to take over the Dominion. I would loved for them to continue that storyline, but it probably just didn't fit in with what they were plotting out for the end once they got to it. And they're like, actually, this doesn't quite work. It would work better if we just retconned it and say that Odo has the disease as well, and in fact, he gave it to them, which is a giant retcon. But, it's just what they wanted to do. They probably thought they could create more tension that way, so whatever. But it's still, whenever I watch this episode, I think what a shame it is that they didn't actually follow through on what they set up here. But it's such a great interaction between Odo and Weyoun in this episode, especially the Weyoun 6, I think it was, the defective one who wanted to defect to the Federation. Like their interactions were absolutely amazing, and I love how they they had the coda at the start and end of the episode that juxtapose Kira's faith in religion, how much of a strength that is to Weyoun's religion, because Odo is always very dismissive of Weyoun's religion because he's the object of it, and he knows that he's not a god, so he feels very uncomfortable with it and doesn't like it. But I love how, even though he knows he's not a god, he still was able to understand him more, and actually, like the scene where he was dying and Odo was like, I give you my blessing, that was such an effective scene. That was such a powerful scene. Such a great character development for Odo, and showed that he was willing to go that extra mile, even though he knows that Weyoun's religion is bullshit because he knows he's not a god, but he also knows that's how he feels, and that he wants to respect him, especially in this moment of death like that. That was such a great moment there. But the other storyline with Nog, as I said, I didn't totally hate this, but I do think that it brings the episode down. It was a bit cartoonish, to be honest. I mean, it was a bit silly, like how he used Chief O'Brien's code, and then he got in trouble with Kira, before taking the desk, and then he got in trouble with this other person. Oh no, I shouldn't have given my code. And then Martok is like, Chief, you're in big trouble, mister. It was just silly. I mean, it was kind of good seeing Nog act like a Ferengi for once, because instead of like the token Starfleet cadet, which season 5 was the worst offender for that, but as I said, I wasn't very big on season 5, so I thought season 6 and 7 did a better job with Nog, who is a character I'm not really big on anyway. But I think this storyline brought the episode down. I think this should have been either gone entirely or put into another episode, and the main episode should have focused more on the Weyoun stuff, and then it would have been amazing. But as it is, it was still really good, but not quite as great as it could be. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is once more Into the Breach, and this is another episode that was meh. This is a very forgettable episode. I mean, season 7, they're trying to wrap up things, so they found the need to wrap up Korra's storyline, even though he was in 2 episodes prior to this. But hey, whatever, let's just wrap up his storyline as well. And I don't know, it's okay, I guess. Like, they created this tension between Martok and Kor, because apparently Kor is a bit of a aristocrat, and he was like all high up in himself in high society, and he turned down Martok because he was a lowborn, whatever. And now he's asking Martok for a favor, and he's being a big dick to him the whole time. And then like the way he has, like, I don't know, it seems like the way he had dementia was like a caricature. It seemed like they were kind of in a way like making fun of people with dementia. The way he was like, Kang is gonna, and the way that like the other Klingons were mocking them. Now I do know that ultimately it was about like the other old dude saying these young people don't appreciate it and they shouldn't be mocking someone who's deteriorating from old age, and to respect your elders and all that. I know they tried to bring it back that way towards the end, but I don't know. Most of the episode, I just think this is okay. Like, the ending was kind of cool, where Worf was going to kill himself in a suicide mission to save everyone. Kor knocked him out and took over the mission and succeeded, and they sung a song to him. I have to admit, I was a bit touched by that ending, but most of the episode was just kind of bleh. So I think this was like a throwaway, forgettable episode. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just there. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is The Siege of AR-558. Now, I've been planning forever to do a full-length review of this. Maybe I was going to couple this episode with the Season 6 episode, I'm trying to remember. The one with O'Brien and the Orion Syndicate was like Honor Among Thieves. The reason why I was going to couple these two episodes in the same review is to talk about how two specific examples of Deep Space Nine just doing a carbon copy of a movie that came out around the time the episode came out, fairly recently. In the case of Honor Among Thieves, it was Donnie Brasco. That episode was just a version of that. Case of Siege of AR-558, it's Saving Private Ryan. Now, I had so many people, I had mentioned this in some videos before, and I had so many people fight me on this. And I'm sorry, but you're wrong. You need to go back, watch the final scene, not the whole entire movie of Saving Private Ryan. Maybe I didn't communicate this enough, maybe that's why people misunderstood me. But watch that final scene of Saving Private Ryan when they meet up with Matt Damon and they're in that little bridge, and you know the Germans are about to come and they're all surrounded and they're going to try to defend the bridge even though they're like greatly outnumbered, and watch that scene and then watch this episode, and if you tell me that they are not very, very, very similar, then you are deluding yourself. This is like the beat for beat for beat, like the whole way in that scene they played like this classical music or this opera music to calm everyone right before the fight, and then in this episode you had Bashir play Vic Fontaine to calm everyone before the fight, and then you had and I think it was very jarring, actually, the way this episode, it's very obvious, actually, very contrived, the way this episode was playing the dramatic, sad drama music over the war, which is very atypical for Star Trek and Deep Space Nine in particular. Usually plays this exciting dun 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 during the battle, but here they're playing this sad. They were playing it more like a tragedy. That's exactly what they did in Saving Private Ryan. Now you might say, well, that's not enough to say this is a ripoff of Saving Private Ryan, and you're right. It's not. It's combined with everything. The way they had that engineer dude sort of mimicked John Lee Davies' characters, and some of those guys who were shell-shocked mimicked some of the other shell-shock characters from Saving Private Ryan, and Sisko was most definitely Tom Hanks' character. Like the way that Sisko was knocked out by the Jem'Hadar and he was blacking out and the Jem'Hadar was standing over him was just like that fucking scene where Tom Hanks was encountered by the tank and kept shooting out a tank, and then the plane came. It's beat for beat. And I remember reading like behind the scenes thing, and they were trying to say, oh, this is inspired by something, whatever 60s or 50s movie. Bullshit! I mean, maybe that inspired it slightly. Maybe that was the original intention when they first sat down to do the script. But this final product I don't know who's responsible. I have no idea. But whoever it was, studio, director, writer, I don't know who. But somebody is like, let's do Saving Private Ryan. Let's capitalize off of that because that was really popular. I think it just came out the year before this aired, so it must have had just came out when they were writing this, and someone saw it recently and are like, let's do that. It's so obvious. Just if you don't think so, you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you are. But leaving all that aside, I'm sorry, I had to get that off my chest. But leaving all that aside, I still like this episode. It kind of annoys me, because it's mainly the last bit of the episode that's really Saving Private Ryan-ish. Before that's kind of its own thing. And apparently, Tuco from Breaking Bad, who plays one of the Marines in this episode, directed this episode, and he is a veteran. So he was using his war experience. Now, someone mentioned that once to say, well, it's not like Saving Private Ryan, but that doesn't prove it's not like Saving Private Ryan. But you can see that he did have that sort of experience and try to inflate that in the episode. And the episode, I do like how the episode tries to have a realistic glimpse on how war is not good and how war is terrible. And that's something that I think Deep Space Nine, maybe not always, but from time to time, they always try to present war as this horrible thing that should be avoided, not this awesome thing. I mean, you got some scenes in some episodes like Sacrifice of Angel where it's really exciting and there's dun 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 and they're playing the music, but there's always this dark side to it. And this episode accentuates that and shows the negative. It shows Nog getting shot in the leg and Quark fighting with Sisko about the morality of it. And again, this is kind of like how Jeremy Davis and Tom Hanks' character would fight over the morality of war again. But anyway, sorry. Putting that aside, I did think it was a good character piece. I did think it was pretty interesting. Not a great episode, but when I watched this episode, I did appreciate it a bit more once I got over the Saving Private Ryan-ness of it. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Covenant. I also did a full-length review for this episode a couple of years ago. I actually went back and rewatched it. It's been so long since I did this review. And I still agree with what I said in that review, that this episode was okay. It's not my favorite. It's they didn't really know what to do with Dukat, and they even said that they didn't know what to do with him, they just wanted to bring him back. And so he's has this cult, this Paul Wraith cult now. And I mentioned in my review that I'm not really, for whatever reason, I'm just not that interested in cults, so I'm really interested whenever there's a TV show that does an episode about cults or a movie about cults. I tend to not like them as much. They tend to be some of my least favorite episodes. Although The Leftovers dealt with cults a lot, and I love that show, so I don't know, maybe that's the exception. But this was more of a stereotypical portrayal of a cult. Now, I talked about how one of the writers was actually a journalist who studied real-life cults, so he brought real knowledge into it, but he made it perhaps a bit too realistic because it just came off as your typical cult story, because there's not much to cults, really. You got a charismatic leader who fools a bunch of people, fanatics, into following him and doing whatever he wants. And I will say that Dukat did fit the role pretty well. And they didn't have, a lot of people were saying that they retconned or fucked up his character or changed his character. I actually disagree with that, and I'll get to that more when I get towards the end of the season. I actually think this actually goes hand in hand with his character, the way he was portrayed as a megalomaniac. He's self-delusional, and he wants to be worshipped, and he's been established at the end of Season 6 as making this alliance with the Paul Wraith, so this makes all the sense in the world. That's probably my favorite part of it. And all the stuff he was doing, how he raped a young woman, and she was okay with that because she's brainwashed by him, and they had the baby, and he tried to, it's a miracle. That's so Dukat-ish. That just fit with his character perfectly, and it was great that Kira also fit with their character to call him out on this bullshit. So I did enjoy this episode for that, but for the most part, it's kind of just a plain, didn't really contribute anything to the show at all. It's just a way to bring the cop back. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is it's only a paper moon. Now, in this top 10 video of Deep Space Nine that I did, maybe 8 years ago now, I have since taken it down. I did a new one to replace it, but the original one I did about maybe 8-7 years ago. This was in my bottom 5 worst episodes, and boy did I hear about it. Boy did I get a lot of disagreement. And when I redid my top 10, I actually took it out of my bottom 5. I was like, actually, it's not one of the worst 5 episodes. And I still got a couple comments, why isn't this in your top 10 best? Well, just be satisfied that it's not my bottom 5 worst anymore. Let's say that. Now, watching this episode again, I will say that I do like it a lot more. Because when I'm doing this rewatch, I try to analyze each episode, pay close attention rather than just watching it for fun or whatever, or just whatever. I try to, have my critiquing hat on, and just try to look at all the specifics of the episode. And doing that does make me appreciate some episodes more, and some episodes actually makes me like even less, which I'll get to shortly. But with this episode, it did make me appreciate it more, because I do see a lot of people attracted to this episode because it deals with PTSD. And it's a very realistic portrayal of the way Nog tries to cope with, his trauma in combat. It's not just the fact that he lost a leg, because they just grew him another one in this modern day, but it was more of the trauma that he felt and the psychological impact it had on him. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I do think it was a very good portrayal. And also, I love the interactions he has with Rom and Lita. I think this is the best family dynamic, because season 5 again, they just rushed Lita into marrying Rom, and it never really felt like they were a family unit until this episode, which I really appreciate that. But I have yet to complain about Vic Fontaine in this video yet, which I forgot to mention. I guess I should have done in an introduction, because that's another really negative part about Season 7, because Season 7 was the season of Vic Fontaine, where he showed up in almost every episode, and I fucking hate this character. And the reason why I originally had this episode in my top 5, or bottom 5 worst, is because I don't like Nog, I don't like Vic Fontaine, and it took me a while in this recent rewatch to move past that, because on the surface I see these two annoying characters that I hate. I hear all these stupid lounge songs, which is part of the reason why I hate Vic so much, and I'm just like, this sucks. That's just like my gut reaction. If I look past that, I can appreciate there are some positive aspects of this episode, but I still think it holds this episode back a lot. There's no way I'll put this anywhere near my top 5. In fact, it may not even make my top 100, if I'm being honest. It's not going to make my bottom 20, or maybe not even my bottom 50, but it's definitely not going to make my top 100 either, because Vic Fontaine sucks. He's not good. This episode does not make him better. The whole storyline about him trying to use this as an excuse to have his program running all the time, and how he wasn't thinking of Nog, and at the end of the episode his program's running, so he gets to sing a song. Great, we have to endure another fucking long song for a couple minutes. I don't watch Deep Space Nine to listen to these crappy ass fucking Frank Sinatra covers. God damn it. Sorry. Not the last time you can hear me complain about this. But and we had so much of that in this episode, and I think it definitely hurts it. It's definitely not a great episode. It's definitely not even a good episode because of that. I think it's a great character thing that they did, dealing with the trauma of PTSD in combat and battle and how people cope with it. They just chose the absolute wrong characters to portray this message. Nog and Vic Fontaine are fucking annoying. Anyway, sorry. I know a lot of people love this episode, but no. Anyway, so what I'm saying is it doesn't suck, but it's not good either. It's in the middle for me. Anyway, let me move on to Prodigal Daughter. And I think I actually liked this episode a lot more than most people do. I thought this was actually a really good episode to flesh out Ezri's character. Now, this is a follow-up to Honor Amongst Thieves, which I was never on board with. So the whole thing about O'Brien trying to find Bilby's wife or widow, and it turns out that one of Ezri's siblings killed her. Yeah, I mean, the whole murder mystery aspect of this episode was really cheesy. It was really cliche. Like when what's-his-face, her younger brother, admitted to being the one who killed her. Like, it felt very like TV script cliche. It didn't feel realistic. It didn't have a sense of realism to it. I didn't buy it for the character. Also, I think the actor who played this character was not very good. I don't think they got it quite, because I couldn't get a handle of what this character was actually supposed to be like. I think the acting kind of didn't mesh with the writing for me. It seemed like that the director wasn't really sure what to do with this character, and maybe he was giving the actor bad advice. I don't know, but it just didn't come off as. And I'm not saying he's a bad actor. He performed well. It didn't perform right. Like this, it didn't seem his performance matched the writing of the character, if that makes any sense. But, all that being said, I still really love the family dynamic with Ezri, particularly her mother. Like, her mother, on the other hand, I think her actor was amazing. I think she nailed this character. She felt like a real character. In fact, I was even thinking while I was watching this episode that this is a much better, more realistic, cantankerous, annoying mother, overbearing mother than Loxana Troi ever was. Loxana Troi, as I said, constantly not a good character. I don't think she was portrayed that well. I don't know why people liked her. I don't know why they kept bringing her back. And I actually think that Ezri's mother was actually better. A much better character than Loxana ever was. And I bought her. I thought she was a bit annoying, but that's kind of the point of the character. But she was annoying in a way. She wasn't annoying in a get off my screen way, the way Loxana was. She was annoying in a way that made sense, that actually helped us push the story along. I got the dynamic of the family being pressured by the Iran syndicate, and how Ezri was sort of on bad terms with him, and how she was trying to look out for her younger brother, but you find out at the end it's actually things go to shit. Like, I did like that. So overall, I would say this was actually a good episode, but just it had too many flaws to call it a great one. So it's just pretty good. Anyway. Speaking of flaws, we got a run of bad episodes with one episode in between the to make it good, but a run of 2 bad episodes, 1 good episode, and then a horrible episode. So let's get into this. Next episode is The Emperor's New Cloak. This episode sucked a lot. I wanted to like this episode when I first saw it because I liked the Mirror Universe. I wanted to see how it was resolved, and I wanted to be, I wanted to be enthralled by the fact that the rebels finally won, that region got taken over. But having a Quark, there are some Quark Ferengi comedy episodes I do like. Like, I love Magnificent Ferengi. This episode, it's just bad. It's like the opposite. It's everything that Magnificent Ferengi wasn't. Like, the way the interactions between Quark and Rom and Zek were not funny at all. And they were actually very annoying and not good storytelling. Like the way Rom kept going like, oh, that's why you called alternate, but if he's not like this, why is he acting like this in the alternate universe? Whoever's bright idea it was to take Quark and Rom and the Grand Nagus and the Mirror Universe should be fired. This is a stupid idea. This is, if you have to finish up and conclude the Mirror Universe storyline, this is not how you do it. This is the opposite of how you should do it, as a matter of fact. And, like, I didn't like anyone in this episode. Like, the Ezri's character was too over the top. Her relationship with Brunt, having Brunt there. I don't give a fuck about Brunt. I don't need to see a Mirror Universe and know he was a good guy. Oh, I hadn't seen that before. And, like, the way that they were so, like, the Regent was like, oh, you do this to us and you can go home. And then when they do it, and like, no, I'm going to kill you. And they're like, no, well, we need you to do this other thing. Okay, if you do this other thing, I'll send you home. No, I'm going to kill you. That's just so cartoon villainy. Like, I complain to death about this. This is like what I call the 24 effect from the TV show 24, which came out after this, admittedly. But it was the whole thing where it was such a cliche. They did in like every season, maybe 2 or 3 times a season sometimes. Or it'd be this evil like arms dealer or something who would be selling something to the terrorists, and the arms dealer is always being all arrogant and like, where's my money? And the terrorists would go, I got your money right here, and pull out a gun and shoot them. That cliche really fucking annoys me, because I don't think it's realistic. I think in real life criminals would kill off anyone they buy from because they want to keep that connection. And I even mentioned this episode many times, like, oh, they could still be useful. But it's just too cartoon villainy for me. And this episode sucked. Anyway, let me move on to the next episode, which is Field of Fire. And this episode sucked as well. I don't know, some people I think like this episode, or maybe thought it was okay. I actually hate this episode. So this is one where Duran comes back because someone's killing. Now, I think this is my particular thing. This kind of goes in hand why I don't like episodes like Meld over on Voyager, which a lot of people like. It's just certain episodes, or not just from Star Trek, but from any show and certain movies that do this, where it has this kind of fake pop psychology about serial killers. Where it's like, oh, well, it makes me powerful. I kill. If killers really want to feel like this is how you feel if you're a killer. And I think that's fake psychology. That's not really how psychology of killers work. And the portrayal of this in this episode was probably one of the worst examples of that I've ever seen. Add to that this episode completely retcons Duran. This is nothing. Not only did they recast him, but the way he's portrayed in this episode is absolutely nothing. Zero like he was portrayed in Equilibrium back in season 3, because that was portrayed that he was having mental issues, he was a bit mentally unstable, and he killed a couple people because he was mentally unstable. He wasn't even aware that he was killing them. It's just he had mental issues, and they were exacerbated by the joining, which he wasn't really prepared properly for. Whereas here, he is a cold, methodical, logical killer, serial killer type person who knows exactly what he's doing. Is like, this is how you feel when you kill someone. That's totally, absolutely zero like Duran was. I'm sorry, I can't get over that. I can get over some continuity hiccups, especially if it works for the episode. But when it doesn't work for the episode, when it creates a stupid, shitty pop psychology, bullshit, mystery, cliche, then no. And this is also just such an offensive continuity error. It is just so blatant and so obvious that they could do a stupid contrived mystery thing about, oh, who's killing the people, and then it turned out to be the Vulcan. And again, Vulcans are assholes. I guess maybe this was the prime for making the Vulcans asshole in Enterprise. They were just priming it up here. The Vulcans like, oh, it's illogical for me to kill people because they're smiling in pictures. fuck this episode. Anyway, let me move on to the good episode. Take a breath with this one good episode before I get into the shitty one again. Chimera, I believe it's pronounced. Probably wrong, but whatever. It's the episode with Laz. Odo meets another changeling. Now, I gave this episode a 7. I was so close. I was debating for literally hours on if I should give it an 8. Finally decided on a 7 instead of an 8 because I really love the ending of this episode, but most of the episode was kind of dull. And I know I've seen some people try to say this was a LGBT analogy, but I honestly don't think it was. I don't think that was intentional. I suppose if you really wanted to, you could make it out of it. Now, because it does have, I know it has Odo and Laz, linking together. And I talked about this, and I think I saw some video that said, oh, that's the equivalent of sex. But I talked about this before, not just this episode, but a lot of previous episodes, that changelings linking is not sex. It's not the equivalent to sex. Even some episodes try to play it off like it is, but it doesn't really make sense, because that means that the Great Link is a giant orgy. And it's not. It's a totally different intimacy. It's a totally different experience. And I would argue the way it's portrayed in this episode that Odo and Laz's relationship is very clearly platonic. Not saying that it has to be. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they did a LGBT message with Odo, but they didn't. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, and I just thought it was kind of like Laz was just a stereotypical asshole. I think it would have been more interesting if he was less of an asshole, if I'm being honest. The way he was like, oh, monoforms are such dickheads and I'm so awesome. I didn't really think that was very interesting, and I never for a single goddamn microsecond think that Odo was actually going to run away with Laz. I mean, even forgetting the part about he's a series regular and they wouldn't write him off the show like this, just wiping that from the mind. Like he's going to leave the crew of Deep Space Nine. Like he's going to fucking leave Kira behind. I didn't buy that. And the whole thing with him killing the Klingon, that was a bit cheesy too. But I was so close to giving this episode an 8 because that ending was beautiful. I think, and I haven't gotten into this yet either. I got a bit into it in season 6, but season 7, the entire thing, Odo and Kira are in a couple. Now, granted, it doesn't always work. It felt kind of off in that first 2-parter at the start of the season. But this is and when it works, it really works. And I still maintain, I know a lot of people don't like them, man, but I did get a lot of support in my season 6 review of people who agree with me that Kira and Odo are a good couple, and that's very reassuring. I'm glad I'm not the only one, even though there's so many who tend to not like it. I think this is one of the best relationships of all of Deep Space Nine. Of all of Star Trek, actually. All of Star Trek. I might do a video one day where I count down my favorite couples. And they would be up there. They'd be top 5 for me. Now, I think this episode is a prime example. And there's several other episodes later in the season, which I'll get to as well. They're a prime example of why it just works so well. Particularly in the ending scene, the way that Kira, releases Laz so that Odo can go be free, because it's the whole, if you love someone, set them free. And it shows that she really loves him, that she's willing to let him go, and how he comes back anyway, and how you see how happy she is that he actually came back, and he shows his appreciation by exploring his differences, his changeling more into shape-shifting into some fog, whatever, that she can breathe in. That was such a touching, great romantic, one of the best romantic moments in all of Star Trek, in my humble opinion. Alright. I guess because I have to, let's get into Bada Bing, Bada Bang. I think if I said this episode sucks, I think that's an understatement. I think that downplays how terrible, how much of a piece of rotting shit this episode is. This episode is plot contrivance, plot contrivance, plot contrivance, that ever plot contrived, the plot contrived, that plot contrived, the plot contrived. And it has Vic Fontaine in it singing fucking Lime songs all the episode. And all the characters acting like it is. And it's just a rip-off of Ocean's 11. And I know, yes, someone even said, oh, Ocean's 11 came out after this episode. Actually, you're talking about the remake. The original with Frank Sinatra came out several decades before this episode. Thank you very much. It is obvious, beyond belief, that they are ripping it off. And it sucks. So, reason why plot contrivance is such plot contrivance, this whole episode, like, alright, I talked about, there's this episode in Voyager, it was like the Captain Proton episode, whatever the hell that was called, Bride of Chaotica. Like, and I talked about how that episode is hilarious, but the plot was so contrived. Well, this episode is like that, except you take the plot contrivance and you times it times 2, and you make the episode not funny, and you make it stupid, and you make it annoying. So, yeah, everything that made that episode good, you take that all away, and you add negatives instead, basically. So, this episode, it starts out with Vic Fontaine. They're in the program enjoying the singing, and all of a sudden the program switches, and there's like this, Frankie Eyes or whatever takes over, the mob takes over at the casino, and he's kicked out, and they kick Vic Fontaine's ass. Now, why is this contrived? Well, because Bashir and O'Brien try to stop the program. They try to erase the characters, but the program won't respond to them. So they go to Felix, which I had this fucking idea of Felix as a character we never see or heard of, but he just creates Vic Fontaine, one of Bashir's friends. But skip that. So they go to Felix and ask why this is happening. And they say, oh, this is Jack in the Box to make the program more interesting. And Bashir's like, well, I thought it was pretty interesting. Okay, so they're like, oh, you have to solve the issue in program in order for it to go away. So you have to find a way. So they had to go and do this heist in order to make Frankie Eyes go away and, steal his money so that the mob would get angry at him and kill him or whatever. They don't mind people dying, I guess. They're just holograms. But anyway, so they have to do that. So why is that contrived? First of all, it's a holosuite. It's a holodeck program. I mean, okay, they said that they could reset it, but by doing so, they erases all Vic memories. I'm not buying that. I don't buy that for a second. It's like a computer program, especially a programmer like O'Brien. So if it's just a layman, like just someone playing computer games, okay. But you got an engineering genius, and you got this Felix fellow who apparently created the program. Surely, I mean, not surely, but yes, they will most definitely be able to tweak the program without erasing Vic's memories to get rid of Frankie Eyes. I mean, that actually sounds relatively easy. Second of all, Jack in a Box, like the whole thing, like Bashir even said, oh, well, the program's fine the way it is. That doesn't really make sense. And plus the way that, Frankie Eyes didn't gradually appear. Just like instantly he was there, and when they solved the problem, instantly he was gone. Like it didn't even make sense for a program itself. And like, why the fuck would he put the Jack in the Box in there in the first place? I mean, it makes more sense to have it as an option, or maybe it pops up. But if Bashir doesn't want to do it, he shouldn't be forced to take the holodeck, because that's the whole thing about the holodeck and holosuite programs. They're supposed to be customizable, which of course they would, because it's the future and they would be able to create whatever they want. So if they don't want to do a storyline about the mob taking over, then they don't have to fucking do the storyline. I mean, that's the whole point. Why would it makes zero sense for them to try to force them to do the storyline in their computer game that they don't want to fucking do? I mean, it could make sense as an option. It could make sense that maybe automatically it comes up. But if Bashir doesn't want it and they say delete Frankie Eyes, then he should fucking be deleted. It's just a contrived way to have this stupid bank heist, which not let me get into the bank heist part of it, because even Ocean's 11 or any heist movie, this is like a rip-off, poor, cheap-ass, shitty version of every single fucking like casino heist movie you ever seen. It was just so cheesy, and the way that they were all talking about Van Tane, and the whole storyline about Cisco being pissed off because it was in the 60s and Las Vegas, and they used to be racist towards black people. I mean, it kind of makes sense with this character, particularly with the recent experience he had in Far Beyond the Stars, but still, I thought it was a stupid storyline. I thought that then Cisco just all of a sudden decided to, oh, fuck all that, let me help Vic Fontaine, and they were singing by the end of it. I can't even express to you how cringeworthy I think that fucking song at the end of this episode where Avery Brooks and Vic Fontaine are fucking singing together. I want that ripped from my memory. But, you know, everyone has musical taste, but I don't need a fucking lounge singer in my fucking science fiction, especially the best science fiction show ever. I don't need to spend all this time with a fucking cheap imitation fucking lounge singer just doing covers of Frank Sinatra songs, and add to that just a cheap rip-off cliche fucking heist movie with contrived plot. I'm going to go mad. Okay. Let me move on to the next episode before I start yelling and cursing. That episode sucks. It sucks a lot. It is a giant piece of shit. It is one of the worst episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. Anyway, thankfully, finally, getting to the good episodes. Let's move on to an episode whose name I can never pronounce correctly. Inter Amman Irmin Silant Legis. It's Latin, I believe. I don't speak Latin, I'm sorry to say. So this is a really good episode. This apparently, I found out somewhat recently, that this was the original premise for the third Next Generation movie that it was eventually called Insurrection. Although I think when this script was in the making, it was actually being called Nemesis. But of course, as we know, Nemesis ended up being the title they used for the fourth movie, which had nothing to do with their idea for the third movie, except for Romulans were involved. So, apparently the original premise was there was going to be a conflict between Picard and Data on how they handle the Romulans. And I think it did have something that was similar in tone to, because the third Next Generation movie is supposed to come out during Season 7 of Deep Space Nine, so during the Dominion War. So I think it was going to have a Dominion War tie-in with the Federation dealing with the aftermath of the Romulans. And just as a side note, that would have made a way better movie than what they actually did with Insurrection, which was a really, really, really poor, mediocre movie. But the Star Trek's real greatest villain, Rick Berman, who at this point was ruining Voyager, and he would create that giant piece of shit known as Enterprise, at least first two seasons when he was involved. He was the one who prevented Michael Piller, who's actually a great writer, from doing that. Said, no, you can't do that. And so instead, Michael Piller came up with this half-assed idea as a replacement, and Rick Berman's like, yes, ding, 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 go ahead and do that half-assed idea instead of this awesome, great idea. So, but it seems for whatever reason, they decided not to throw that idea away, instead transplant it into a Deep Space Nine episode, and it is a fucking good one. This episode, so this is like the follow-up to Section, they turn into this follow-up of Section 31 with Sloan and sending Bashir on this, spy mission to Romulus because he's going on the conference there anyway. And I love this episode because there's so many ins and outs. It's like, you don't know what's going on, and there's so many twists and turns that feel so natural. Like this episode is like a really good Cold War era spy movie. Now, it's obviously the analogy they're going for here is like the alliance between the Allies, particularly the U.S., although you could even say Britain, though, so let's just say the Allies in World War II and the Soviet Union, and how they were allied to fight the Axis power, but after the war, two of them created a Cold War, and the two superpowers didn't get along. And here they sort of did that analogy, except they were like kind of prepping for a Cold War in case that happened, which I think is really plausible. In fact, I kind of am a bit disappointed that they didn't actually go in that direction. Instead, they kept wanting to go in the direction of like making Romulus supernova, which, you know, they hinted at in All Good Things, and making Romulan Empire crumble and the Klingons take over, which is what they did in the 2009 Abomination, which, sorry to say, that part of it actually is canon, and the new Picard show is going to continue on for that and have Romulan Empire be destroyed, which I'm disappointed in. I don't think that's very interesting. I think it would have been more interesting to explore this Cold War idea. But then again, I guess people would argue that they already did a Cold War analogy with the Klingons in the original series. But I think they could do something new and different, and I think this episode gives you a glimpse of what that would be like, because this shows more of the espionage side. Like the original series analogy of the Cold War is more like, let's not get into a nuclear war because everyone will die side of the Cold War. Whereas this deals more with the espionage side of the Cold War, the intrigue, the spy stories. And I think it does a damn good job at it. And apparently, like, the original idea was that Sisko would be the one teaming up with Bashir, and Sisko would be the one who betrayed Bashir. But then they decided against that idea because they didn't want, that would kind of ruin Sisko's character a bit. They didn't want to portray him as the bad guy. And you know what? I actually agree with that. I actually think that was a smart move. I think what they did do in this episode with Sisko actually being on Bashir's side, and it was Admiral Ross who betrayed them, made a lot more sense. Now, the downside of that is they had to make Admiral Ross a main character for this episode, which he was kind of just this, you know, the reoccurring admiral just shows up and, here's your mission, Benjamin, blah, 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 and I never really liked this character that much anyway. But I think the good in that decision definitely way outweighs the bad. Even though it was kind of annoying having Ross be it, because basically this whole episode is just Bashir is like the only main character we really know. We have Ross, we have Kretek, we have Sloane, who are all reoccurring characters that barely appear. But I do like that. I think, and they have what's his face? Is it John Fleck who plays Silic, who will go on to play Silic in Enterprise? He's actually played a Romulan in Next Generation. He plays the head of Tal Shiar. Such a good actor. He does such a great job of doing like a sleazy, despicable, like in here he's almost like an evil type character, and it's just the twists and turns about Bashir trying to do the right thing, and then he's so manipulated by Sloane, ends up playing right into Sloane's hand. And I especially love the way that Bashir figures this out at the end of the episode when he goes to Ross. He's like, where's Sloane? Because he's genetically enhanced and he's able to put it all together. Good stuff. Love this episode. I think it's a really amazing episode. I appreciated it even more this time around in the rewatch, like analyzing everything. I think it's put together so well. Now, it is time to get into the infamous 10-episode story arc. Now, I gotta say about this story arc, I think I do overall like the story arc better than the Season 6 Station Takeover. Although I think they're both great, and I think they're both highlights of the entire show. I think this one is picked on a lot because there is a lot of soap opera stuff in it. But what I love, there are a few episodes that aren't very good, particularly this first one I'm about to get into, in this arc. But I think that doesn't really matter because overall, like, this feels like a Game of Thrones type thing. This is really cutting edge. I would even argue even more so than Babylon 5. Sorry, B5 fans. I know B5 came out first, but I find it's not quite as serialized as B5 fans tend to make it out to be. It's definitely more serialized than Deep Space Nine, don't get me wrong. But I think this 10-episode story arc has more of a Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, Expanse type feel to it than Babylon 5 ever did, just my opinion. but or Lost, another one. But yeah, so the way that they're able to build characters, and this is why I love serialization. This is why I'd argue against people who don't like serialization in Discovery, for example, because the serialization in Discovery is actually my favorite aspect of Discovery. Discovery has a lot of issues. Serialization is actually a positive, in my opinion. And this 10-episode story arc is a great example of how serialization, because I think the problem with Discovery is they don't utilize serialization enough. Where this 10-episode story arc is a great example of how you can get the best out of serialization, how it's awesome to have a 10-hour movie. Now, you could say, well, it's not really 10 hours because each episode is like really 45 minutes. You take out the commercials. But, and there are some standalone stories within this 10-episode arc. But the reason why it works so well is because of the character evolutions and the way they're able. I mean, I think it was the smartest move in the world to do a 10-episode arc to wrap out the series. The way that they're able to wrap up all the character stories and really develop these characters in this ending arc and have these overall arcs of character arcs throughout this thing, particularly with Damar. My God, is that fucking impressive. But anyway, let me get into specific episodes, starting with Penumbra. Probably pronouncing it wrong again. So this is the first. This is a really soap opera-y type episode, and I didn't care that much for it. Although I liked, has again the elements of the character stories that follow through the, overarching, how you can tell they're setting up all these character stories that will continue over. Love that part of it, so I wouldn't say this is a bad episode. But the part of Ezri going to look for Worf when his ship was destroyed, blah, 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 who cares about that? And the fact that Ezri and Worf actually pork on the planet, it's like, that's dumb. I don't really buy it. I don't really buy that Worf would go for Ezri. He made it really clear, didn't like it. I don't buy that Ezri would go for Worf. Now, it is kind of relieved a bit because later on in the arc, they both realized that it was a mistake, but I don't know. I don't think that totally, and they just got caught up in the heat of the moment, but I don't think that totally excuses it. And plus, the whole story arc of her going off to rescue Worf was a bit boring. And of course, like, they did this thing that would ruin the finale because they played clips of audio clips of Jadzia and Worf together to when Ezra is trying to find motivation to go after Worf, and they use Terry Farrell's image and her voice without her permission, and she sued them, which is why they weren't able to use her in any of the clips in Worf's flashback and the final episode, which kind of totally ruined his flashback, with the point why they just shouldn't have done it if they couldn't get images of Jadzia. But it's their fault for fucking up here, and this was a much less important use of it. Anyway, we also get the introduction of the storyline of Sisko marrying Cassidy and the Prophets, or Sarah Sisko. Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to bring back Sarah Sisko. They can't introduce the Mother Prophet and not doing anything with her, but it's so cheesy. I don't really like the Prophets from this point on, because they just have Sarah doing it. My son, I'm going to retcon the whole show, because this is not how the fucking Wormhole aliens were portrayed in Season 1. But the whole thing, you will know nothing but sorrow if you marry Cassidy Yates. It's not true. He marries her anyway, and he just goes to live off the Prophets. It doesn't necessarily mean he knows nothing but sorrow. He's living with the Prophets. What does he care? I mean, sure. I mean, maybe to some extent he's very sorrowful that he's left his new wife and child behind, but I mean, would that really make any difference if they didn't get married? What if they were just boyfriend and girlfriend and they had a son together? I'm sure he would be just as sorrowful. But anyway, I mean, the whole thing was just had that fantasy element that was a bit cheesy. But as I said, it was an okay episode, not a bad one. Anyway, we'll move on to the next episode in the arc, which is Till Death Do Us Part, and I gotta be honest, like, I had to pay very close attention to what happens in each episode, because before rewatching it, when I look at all these episode titles, I have no fucking clue what happens in which one, because they do kind of all blend together, which, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing, as a matter of fact, but it does make it hard to separate the episodes out. But I watched it more carefully and try to get it. So this introduces the storyline of, Gul Dukat was in the other episode where he went to Damar and pretending to be a Bajoran, but this episode introduces Kai Wynn, and it shows that he's her target, or she's his target, where he pretends to be this farmer of the land to manipulate Kai Wynn. So since I'm bringing up Kai Wynn, might as well get into this now. This is another thing I very, 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 very strongly disagree with. This popular opinion I've seen a lot, where people don't like what they did with Kai Wynn and the story arc, because I cannot disagree with that more. In fact, I would be as bold as to say this is the best use of Kai Wynn in the entire show, and it made perfect sense for her character. It made total and complete 100% totally fit within her character. In fact, when I talked about in the episode in season 5, The Rapture, where she was kind of helping Sisko and being a force of good, that was a bad use of her character, in my opinion. That was totally out of character for her. Because here's the thing about Wynn, is that she was always portrayed as someone who uses religion as an excuse to gain power. And there are people like this in real life. I'm not saying that all religion is bad or all religious figures are bad. I think the way that Season 1 and Season 2 Deep Space Nine portrayed it by having juxtaposing Wynn and Baral was spot on, because you do have real life religious figures who really do believe in what they're saying, who really are trying to help people, and that was personified in Baral. And you have the power-hungry mad people who just want power, and they don't really give a fuck about the religion. They just use it as an excuse to gain power, and that's what Wynn was portrayed to be. That's why her portrayal in Season 5 felt so fake to me, because she was actually believing in the religion, which goes against her character, in my opinion. In my opinion, she kind of believes, but that's not really the point. How much faith she has is not her point. Her point is power, 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 power. That's why I like episodes like the Shakar episode in Season 3, where she tried to become the first minister as well, because that's who she is. And so this ending story arc, where, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to other episodes, because again, they kind of blend in, where she does eventually abandon the prophets for the Pala race. So a lot of people were against that. They're like, oh, that's totally against her character. Bullshit. It is 100% in her character. In fact, the way that they portrayed it was so good. The way that they built up to it, totally made sense, because her initial reaction was because she was jealous of Sisko because the prophets talked to him and not her. Totally in her character. I love that. And so when the prophets started talking to her, she's like, oh, started getting all higher on herself. So when Dukat shows up as the Bajoran person, she thinks, oh, you're here to guide me because I'm so awesome. The prophets love me. My life is great. Love, awesome. I'm so great. But when it's revealed to her that it's not the prophets, it's the Pala race, her initial reaction is to go, what the fuck? These are evil, because that's what she was taught her whole life. What the fuck's going on? And then she goes to Kira, what do I do? And Kira's like, well, things are going to be better once you step down as Kai. And her reaction to that was like, what do you mean step down as Kai? What you talking about now? and then she starts to get the reaction like, well, maybe the prophets are false and the real gods are the Pala race, because Pala race are promising her power. Prophets that did fuck all for her. In fact, Kira's implying that she has to give up her power in order to honor the prophets. Fuck that. As I said, Kai Wynn is all about power. The religion is circumstantial. It's incidental. So I think the way that they showed that, the way that she changed from when, after Kira said, please, you step down, she was like, fuck that shit. I want to join the Pala race instead. that could not have been a better, more realistic character turn for her that fits so much into her character. I love the portrayal here. Anyway, kind of got ahead of myself. Also, Till Death Do Us Part is when Sisko decided to marry Cassidy anyway, and also Ezri and Worf get captured by the Breen, and they're with the Breen. Nobody knows what's going on with the Breen. When we get a lot of cool scenes. See, I talked about in the first 2 episodes of the season how the Damar and Wayne stuff was stupid. Here, in this arc, the Damar and Wayne stuff are, I mean, they're so good. As I said, like what they did with Damar's character during this arc, they took this whiny little brat of a character who was kind of two-dimensional, and they made him into a very realistic, very relatable character. And I love the journey you see him go through in these 2 episodes in particular, where he's drinking himself. I love the scene where Damar stops drinking and Wayne was like, "You look a bit naked. Something's missing. You don't have your bottle with you." Like, that's such a great scene. Although that does come in a later episode. I am getting the episodes jumbled. So let me go ahead and move over to the next episode, which is Strange Bedfellows. So this is the episode that starts with Ezri and Julian. No, it's not. So, alright, I'm already getting them confused. So this, what the hell happens in this episode? Oh no, this episode's a bit better, I think. So this is an episode where Ezri and Worf are on the ship. Oh yeah, they had some of the cheesiest dream sequences. Like, these dream sequences are so poorly acted. Where not dream sequences, but they have Ezri and Worf are lying down dreaming and they're being delirious. It's like, because they're being tortured and whatever, but it felt very fake. Like, it felt like they were very lucid. If they were in a state where they were like mumbling and saying stuff, they would be a lot more sort of sickly or hysterical, and they didn't come off that way. The way they portrayed them, they just seemed very lucid. They just plainly said, "Oh, I'm not like you, Duran. I'm not a murderer." Like, I totally didn't buy. And Worf's one was just as bad, if not Worf. He was like, blah, 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 and then she says in her sleep, "I love you, Julian," and then Worf gets all pissed off. like that part of it was a bit silly. Shit, I can't even remember what else happened in this episode. I think we got more of the Kai Wynn stuff, which I already touched on. And, yeah, and so then we have Damar's turn where he actually lets Ezri and Worf go, which was very exciting. And, of course, oh yeah, the Breen, of course, they reveal that the Breen, at the end of this episode, they reveal that the Breen, it's the end of the last episode, sorry, mixed up. They reveal that the Breen's joining the Dominion. Now, I think I heard somewhere that originally they were going to have the Zenkethi join the Dominion. And I think that would actually make more sense, because the Zenkethi, even though they were just popped up out of nowhere and they were just mentioned all of a sudden in the 3rd season episode, The Adversary, they were portrayed as the superpower that if they went to war with the Federation, it would cause upheaval in the whole galaxy, and they were name dropped a couple times later. So it would kind of make more sense, because they were already established as like a superpower, whereas the Breen was kind of just another one of these nondescript mercenary species like the Lethians or the Uridians or whoever that just pop up from time to time. They have no real power, but then all of a sudden, now they're portrayed as being this really powerful species. So that part of it, I think, but on the other hand, Zenkethi were never actually shown, whereas the Breen were at least shown. But it was obvious they were saying they were doing an homage to the Princess Leia outfit that she wore as a bounty hunter at the start of Return of the Jedi. And they do a greater homage later on in this season when Kira wears it and takes off the mask. It's just like Princess Leia. But so they were kind of playing with that. But, ultimately I'm okay with them doing with the Breen. It does kind of retcon them a little bit, but I think it's okay. The one thing that did annoy me, though, is when Weyoun tried to say that they weren't actually from they weren't from a cold place, because there were so many references, and I caught them throughout, like, season 4 and 5, about the Breen being cold. Like, this is cold as Breen. And then all of a sudden Wayne was like, oh, that's just a lie. It's a rumor they make up. They're not actually from a cold place. I don't like that. I try to retcon. My headcanon to try to make that better to me is that Wayne is just bullshitting. Is that he's just having Damar on because he's an asshole. That's my headcanon, because I think that's stupid. I think it's much better to me. It makes much more sense if they are actually from an icy cold place. But anyway, this was a good episode. I did appreciate this episode slightly more than the other two. But anyway, let me move on to the next episode, which is The Changing Face of Evil. So this is the one where Ezra and Worf return to Deep Space Nine, and the Breen attack Earth. So everyone's like all up. You know, they're all freaked out about Earth being attacked, and they're having the deal. And I think, I'm not sure. I think this is the one where, I don't know, is it the next one? No, it's not this one. Okay. So anyway, I can't even remember what happens in this one. But I do remember it was great. It was a good episode, because this is the episode where they, the Breen and Dominion go to take back Shintaku. So there's a huge battle, and they have this energy weapon that, like, instantly disables ships, and the Defiant gets destroyed, which I thought was a very bold move, until a couple of episodes later where they just get a new Defiant. It kind of takes the emotional impact of losing a ship if they just all of a sudden get a new one a couple episodes later. But whatever, it was still a great moment where this indestructible ship, you never think they would go down, it actually goes down, and the Defiant gets destroyed. But the end of this episode is what really makes it for me. The end of this episode is absolutely amazing when a Damar reveals that he's starting a resistance group. Like, you see him earlier in the episode sort of meeting with Rasat and trying to plan it out, but then at the end of the episode, right after this huge victory with the Breen and had this indestructible weapon, they reveal that they attacked a Dominion outpost, did a lot of damage, and the way they showed this with, like, the communication with Damar on screen, with the people on Deep Space Nine watching, and they're realizing that this could be the way they win the war, and it has Sisko talking to Admiral Ross, and Kira being like, we need to help Damar, this could turn the tide of the entire war. That was such an exciting scene. Just the way it was played, it was, like, so great. I was like, oh, my heart pumping. I wanted to see the next episode. This is serialized storytelling at its best. This is an amazing episode. Great episode. One of my favorites. It just illustrates what's so good about this story arc. Anyway, let me move on to the next episode, which is When It Rains. Now, this is kind of more of your setup episode of the story arc, so it's still really good, but it's not, like, superb. But this is the episode where, I almost said this in the previous episode, but this is the episode where Bashir finds out that Odo is infected with the disease. Again, not retcon, but whatever. And Odo goes on a mission with Kira and Garrick. Now, this is great. The setup for this was great too. How Sisko realizes that Kira is the best person, ironically, to train a Cardassian resistance group, but of course Garrick points out that's actually going to hurt Damar's position if he's seen taking orders or advice from a Bajoran terrorist. So they make Kira a Starfleet officer, which I don't really see makes that big of a difference, and the fact Garrick even seems a bit dubious about it, but apparently they went with it, and of course you get all the infighting with Rasat, who's a total dick to Kira, and the Cardassians are being typical Cardassians. Now, I love Garrick's portrayal in these episodes, though, because he is, like, totally on Odo and Kira's side. Now, at the face of it, you think, well, that's kind of against his character just because he's friends with these aliens. But no, it's not because he's friends with Kira and Odo, which, well, he's kind of friends with Odo, but he's not friends with Kira. But it's not because of that. It's not because he's friends with Odo. It's because he wants what's best for Cardassia, and he is able to put his petty bickering, which was never really his thing. It was more of the Goals thing, like Gul Dukat or Gul Damar. His thing he was always able to put aside these petty bickering and able to do what's best for Cardassia. And he sees that the best way forward is for them to listen to Kira because she knows what she's talking about, and he's smart enough to see that. So I think it makes total sense that he's on Kira and Odo's side, not because he's buddies with them, but because he knows the best way to free Cardassia, and he's smart. Where Resat is an egotistical asshole who lets his disdain of Bajorans and his pride get in the way. And again, this is a great character portrayal of Damar, because Damar, you don't really know which way he's going to go with it, because in this episode he's like, I am giving Resat my backing, like, because he still has that Cardassian pride side of him, but you see him starting to be a bit more reasonable, and I love the way they start building that up in this episode. So this is a great build-up, set-up episode. And I think this is when they introduce the concept that where Bashir goes to try to find the cure for Odo, and he wants information from Starfleet Medical, and those are great scenes as well, where the guy's being a total dick to Bashir just for wanting to help cure Odo, and he deduces that Section 31 purposely gave him the disease, which is a retcon, but it's an interesting storyline. So as I said, I pardon it. So, and then that leads into the next episode, which is kind of the conclusion, Tacking into the Wind, which is one of my favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine. I think it was in my top 5 last time I did a top 10 Deep Space Nine episodes. I love this episode. This to me, this encapsulates, this is the best episode of the whole story arc. This encapsulates why the story arc is so awesome. And this episode, more than any other one, has a Game of Thrones type feel to it. Oh yeah, the other storyline I forgot to mention that started in the previous episode with Gowron coming onto the station and being a dick and trying to sabotage Martok, and he's giving away, like, the Klingon ships are the only ones that are immune to the brain weapons, so it's the Allies' greatest power, and he's just squandering it because of his petty politics. And so that follows up and Tacking into the Wind, and I love it. It's just like the great how they were able to, like, take risks to actually have Worf kill Gowron, which I did not see coming. And it was so great, and the way he got to the conclusion by talking to Ezri, and Ezri was like, yeah, I think the Klingon Empire deserves to die because you let, corrupt and petty politicians run everything. So it makes Worf realize that he needs to not let it, and how Martok is very resistant because he wants to be a loyal Klingon, but Worf kills Gowron himself and gives Martok the leadership. Now, I do think it's a bit silly that whoever kills Gowron can just become leader, but I think it does. I'm able to let that go. And then they advance the whole Section 31 storyline again, with O'Brien coming up with an idea to trap an agent, which I thought was pretty interesting. But the Kira and Odo stuff, again, this is another episode I'm talking about that really showcases why this relationship is so awesome. Because it has Odo's like going on missions and shape-shifting, and he's starting to the disease is starting to spread more the more he shapeshifts, so he's getting really sick. He hides it from Kira, and Garak finds out, and he's like, don't tell her, blah blah. And you get the build up with Resat and Kira, where she has to like kick his ass, and you have this ominous thing with Garak. It's like, oh, you have to do something about him. You have to kill him before he kills you. That's great. So good, so great. It takes so much advantage of this long-term story arc telling to really build these characters, make really involved and suspenseful and great storytelling, and all ends in this awesome, amazing scene where you have this Vorder on the ship, Luarn, and Odo pretends to be the female shapeshifter, and they come aboard and they shoot her and they kill her, and then you have the fucking Mexican standoff like a Tarantino movie with Resat pointing a phaser at Kira, and then Garak points his phaser at Resat, and then Damar points a phaser at Garak, while the whole time Kira's just creating Odo, who's like dying from this disease. Like, oh my god, that scene was so good. It's so great when Rusat was like just taunting Kira's like, I'm gonna kill you, and Garrick's like, I'm still here, Rusat. Like, and again how great they build on Damar's character, that they actually had Damar shoot and kill Rusat and then say his Cardassia is dead, because that was the blossom of his character. It's him realizing that he cannot hold on to the Cardassian of the past, that's gone. He has to move on, and Rusat wasn't able to do that, so he needed to go. So good. Such a great episode. This is why I think this is one of the best episodes of the show. It's such a good episode. Anyway, and that ending. Oh God, I gotta talk about the ending where Kira is creating Odo, and Kira tries to comfort him, but he's like, Nerys, just be quiet, and they just hug each other. Again, this showcases how great the relationship is, how emotional it is. I think it's one of the best relationships in all of Star Trek. Alright, now I can move on. Let's get on to next episode, Extreme Measures. This episode's okay. I think I used to be too harsh on this episode because it was kind of a letdown, because after getting all these episodes where it was like a continuing story arc, you had all these different storylines going at once, it all comes to a screeching halt, especially after that amazing episode before. It comes to a screeching halt where we just focus on Bashir and O'Brien for the entire episode. And honestly, I think the story drags a bit. I think that they should have continued on with the multiple story arcs. I don't think there's any reason to do an entire episode focused on this, because I think it does drag and it gets a bit silly. Like the whole thing about going into someone's mind. Now, to be fair, this episode does do a way better job at this than the third season episode Distant Voices, which was just a travesty. This episode does at least do a better episode of going into someone's mind, but it's still just a hard concept to throw off. Now, a couple years later, I think 6 years later, this movie came out with Jennifer Lopez called The Cell. And when I saw trailers for that movie and that movie came out, I think it might have not even been 6 years. It might have just been 2 or 3. And so when that movie came out, I was like, hey, it's Extreme Measures. And they're just doing the Deep Space Nine episode. And I'm still convinced that somebody, I don't know who, but somebody who was working that movie saw this episode. Now, I think it's possible, I don't know for sure, but maybe that movie is based off a book that came out before this episode, and I'm not saying that movie was a ripoff of this episode, because it's not really a true original idea. I'm sure there's many other storylines similar to this, but I do think whoever greenlit that movie was aware of this episode and inspired by that. That's just me. And when I saw it, I was like, hey, because that movie was about a psychologist going inside of a serial killer's mind in order to save somebody's life and to find out some information, which is pretty much what Bashir does. He goes into this, he's definitely a sociopath. He goes into his mind to try to find out information to save someone's life. So it's kind of the same thing, but kind of different. But it drags on a bit, like when Bashir and O'Brien get shot, and he's talking about how Bashir thinks he likes O'Brien, likes him more than his wife, which I like the relationship, but I don't like when they get into these stupid cheesy. I think the writers focus a bit too much on them sometimes. And then the whole thing where there was a fake out, where they thought they were in a real life, but they were still in Slo's mind. That was so predictable. Like that whole fake out thing is just a cliche done to death, and it wasn't done particularly well here. But I did like the fact that Bashir got the jump on Sloan, especially after Enter Armored Silent Legis, where Sloan totally played Bashir. It was satisfying to see Bashir get his revenge. Although I will say this episode is not as good as that other episode, because there's not as many ins and outs. With the Enter Armored Silent Legis, it was complex. You had plans within plans and twists within twists, and they all worked. Where here it was very straightforward and simple, so it was a bit less interesting, to be honest. But it was satisfying seeing Bashir get the better of Sloane. Like when Sloane realized that he was fucked and he wanted to kill him, he needed to kill himself. Like that was a great scene. And how he's just like, well, it was men like I misread you, Bashir. I thought you were just naive, but you're actually dangerous. And thank God there's men like me who's willing to sacrifice. And it also shows his mindset, how he thinks that he's in the right. So that part of it was good. So I'll say ultimately this is a good episode, just not great. Anyway, let's get into the penultimate episode of the show, The Dogs of War. Now, this is another episode that gets a 9 instead of a 10. It would get a 10 if it wasn't for the Ferengi side storyline. But again, I didn't hate the Ferengi side. In fact, I thought this was one of the better Ferengi storylines in the show. But it's still a Ferengi storyline, and the Ferengi storylines in general aren't very good. And I suppose I see that they felt the need to wrap up this whole Ferengi storyline, and it did it kind of hastily, which I'm not complaining about too much, because at least we didn't have to see too much of it, but it does seem kind of rushed. But I think the episode would have been better off if they focused more on the Dominion War, but then again, I guess they had to do that. So, but that's why I had to take it from a 10 to a 9. But it's still 9. It's still a great episode. It's still the whole thing with the Cardassian resistance moving, falling apart, and Kira and Bashir and Garrett getting stranded on Cardassian Prime, and them realizing they can start a civilian revolution. Like, that was really, really good stuff. And then you have, I might as well get into the whole thing with Bashir and Ezri hooking up, because this is what happens in this episode they were teasing at. Bashir and Ezri is another couple I love. I hear a lot of people complaining about them as another like couple I think really works. In fact, they show them in the finales, has a couple and sleeping together, and they're the best finale couple, because every time this season finale, since Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, although Enterprise didn't do this, they always have to have two not minor characters, but somewhat main characters, but not like the captain, hook up. Like they had Worf and Deanna Troi do that in All Good Things, and that was a horrible couple, did not work at all. And even worse, don't fucking get me started on 7 to 9 Chakotay. Just do not get me started. Nothing could be worse. But here with Ezri and Bashir, bar none, the best out of all of them. Like this relationship actually was really worked. It made sense, because a lot of people, some people I heard who badmouth this say that Bashir is just treating her like Jadzia. But I disagree. And in fact, the novels I talked about, there's these post-novels that take place after Deep Space Nine, which I love. The one part I didn't like is they immediately broke up Bashir and Ezri and said, because she broke up with him, saying that he was just wanting Jadzia. I disagree. I think whoever wrote that novel is wrong. That is not how the relationship was portrayed. I think it was obvious that he liked Ezri for who she was. And because he had, they were all playing this crush he had on Jadzia, but ultimately, he thought of her as a friend. They had this platonic relationship, this bond that was not romantic at all. But his interactions with Ezri were actually, had a lot more overtones of romance and love throughout, and I think they were a really good pair, because Ezri's kind of the bumbling sort of I wouldn't say an idiot, but she likes to bumble and mumble and go on and stuff. Was just very similar to Bashir. Bashir was very much the same way when he started. He was constantly bumbling. I think they make, and the way they stumble around together in this episode where they're just meeting each other, it's like, oh, it's so weird. Like, that was so in keeping with both of their characters. I think they're an amazing mech. Screw what anyone else thinks. Anyway, so that was a good part of the episode. And the Ferengi thing, I think one scene I love, and I always think of this scene, it brings up my sort of political mindset, is the scene where Quark is bitching about all the reforms of Ferenginar, and he's just rambling, and every time he complains about something, Rom just quickly, haphazardly points out why that's actually a good idea, and Quark's not even listening to him. I love that scene. That's actually really good. And the whole thing, it was a bit cheesy though, the whole thing with Nagus thinking he was talking to Quark. And plus, come on, they already did this story. When they said Quark was going to be Grand Nagus, they already did this storyline in season 1 and called it Nagus. They're just rehashing it. Of course, they're doing the twist that Rom's a Nagus, which is, I think that's a bit fucking ridiculous. Honestly, that they're making this engineer the Grand Nagus, the leader of the Ferengi people. Whatever. But, I mean, it kind of makes sense because Quark was right that Rom was the best person to lead this new kind of Ferenginar. But it's kind of weird that all these massive reforms just happened in Ferenginar so quick that Quark wasn't even aware of them. That's a bit hard to buy, I'm sorry. And it seems like because they dealt with it in that episode, which I fucking hate, which I will not mention, they make it seem like there's a lot more social strife on Ferenginar, that change isn't coming easy, which makes a lot more sense. But in this episode, boom, changes happens overnight, and so fast that Quark doesn't even know about it. So that's a bit hard to swallow. But ultimately, as I said, I kind of don't mind them rushing through this Ferenginar storyline because I'd rather they not focus on it too much. So kind of mixed bag. I'm kind of glad they just got it out of the way. Anyway, let's get into the big finale, What You Leave Behind. And I do give this episode a 10. I was tempted to give it a 9 because it's hard to rate this episode. I think, like, if I judged this episode on just the first hour and a half, or hour and 15 minutes, really, I would say this would be in contention for my best episodes of Deep Space Nine. This would be right up there, maybe just behind Duet and The Pale Moonlight. This would be my number 3. This would be one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. But you have the last 45 minutes, which didn't totally suck, but there was a lot of flaws, and it was kind of cheesy. It was really dumb. And you had to endure fucking singing Hologram, sing a whole song, and how they played that song, and have these cheesy flashbacks, and they're like, oh God. Fuck that. And it's this episode that kind of makes me think, like, I fought against this a lot, and I did my Babylon 5 reviews. I fought against the whole Deep Space Nine being a Babylon 5 ripoff. I think there are some similarities, but I think there's a lot of differences. To say it's a ripoff is a bit far-fetched. And plus, I think Babylon 5 ripped off earlier Star Trek, so I think it's kind of the kettle calling the pot black or whatever. There's one Babylon 5 episode, it's just a carbon copy of Chain of Command. It's just ripping off Next Generation. But anyway, tangent. Point is, I actually kind of see the point here with this episode, because with the whole with the way they dragged out the ending and how they had to have these flashbacks and be all sappy, that's how Babylon 5 ended the show. And although I didn't think that ending was the best, I did think that was a bit too sappy as well. It did work better than it did here. Here it just seemed like they just did it half-heartedly, and they're like, well, Babylon 5 did this long, drawn-out ending, so we have to do it too. That's what it felt like to me. Maybe I'm wrong. But, yeah, that is how it came off to me. So that was definitely a negative. The Dukat. Now, as I said, I talked a bit about the Dukat and Kai Wynn storyline earlier on, and how I liked the development. I didn't get into it later in the story where she killed her assistant and found out it was Dukat, and then they had more of an adversarial type relationship. I thought that worked. I thought what they did with Dukat worked. But their resolution to that storyline in this episode was extremely anticlimactic. It was just way rushed, because it was all this build-up. And I think it's obvious that they didn't know where they were going, that they were just making up the story as they go along with, but just for, just to state this for the record, that in itself is not a bad thing, because there are some shows that can make stuff up as they go along and do a good job. Whenever I point it out, it's not because they're making up as they go along, it's because it's obvious that they're making up that it's going along, and that's what you don't want. That's a bad thing. Like Breaking Bad, they made it up as they go along, but you can't tell because it seems natural. It works. That's an example of making up as you go along, done right. This is an example of making up as go along done wrong, because you can tell it's obvious and it's disproportionate because it's a lot. I mean a lot of build-up for such an easy, simple resolution. All that happens, Sisko comes down, he verbally spars with Dukat for a minute, and then he throws Dukat over a cliff, and that's it. Burns a book. Over. I mean, that was resolved way too easily, way too quickly. I think, honestly, that they should have resolved this in the penultimate episode. I know they kind of wanted to do it after the Dominion War, but I think so they could lead into Sisko living with the prophets or whatever. But I think they could have found a way. If they could have found a way to do this in the penultimate episode, so they could have left the finale just for the Dominion War and not worry about the Dukat thing, and they could have spent more time on focusing on the storyline and having a more satisfying resolution. Plus, as I said, I think they could have brought in Kira and Garak because I feel like the Kira and Dukat conflict in particular was a hanging thread that should have been resolved. Maybe there's not a way they could have brought in Garak, but I think they could have brought in Kira somehow, or she was on Cardassia. I don't know. It could have been difficult, but I was a bit disappointed we didn't get any conclusion to that they focused more on Sisko. So I think they could have handled that whole ending better. But the first part of the episode that dealt with the Dominion War, fuck, that's amazing. That's why I still give this episode a 10. I know a lot of people might say, because again, my scaling system, a 10 doesn't mean a perfect 10. It doesn't mean everything's perfect. It's just a scale. There can be, because I don't do points. So there could be a lower 10, or there could be a higher 10, or there could be a mid 10. And this is more of a lower 10. Because that first 2/3 of the episode, I should say, were so good. I mean, it was like the best. That I think, even though the part with Dukat and the part with was really dumb, it still doesn't change the fact. It's still far outweighed by how absolutely amazing the first part of this episode is, that dealt with the Dominion War. I mean, this was such a Deep Space Nine way. This is so signature, and again, this is getting into, rather than the Federation coming and winning the day and going da da da, we beat the enemy, it had a more realistic, which is true to Star Trek, and more dark, more war is bad, and that scene where like Martok wants to toast to defeating, and Sisko and Ross are like, we're standing in the side of a genocide. I'm not really going to toast to that. It was so great. It really illustrated the complexity and how war is just not a good thing, and not something that should be romanticized. And it's just so dark. And the way that Deep Space Nine only is how the founders tried to wipe out all the Cardassians, and fucking Damar, who's built up. And this, I didn't think it was anticlimactic at all. Actually, I thought that was handled very well. Damar was built up as this true leader, and he just gets killed. I mean, the random violence of it, like, speaks to the way war is and how unpredictable it is, and it erases the notion that it's this heroic notion of heroes defeating the bad guys, and it shows that it's more dark and complex in the way that Garak just shows up and right out murders Weyoun, and knowing that he's not going to get another clone. Like, it was so good. And the way they close things, where Odo links with the changeling, and then automatically is able to transfer, get her to stand down and stop the war, and the talk that Garak and Bashir had. That was so great. Oh my God, where Garak was like traumatized, his world was in ruins, but he still had to acknowledge and say goodbye to his dear friend. Like, that whole thing was just handled so well. It was just so amazing. So as I said, if I just take that first 2/3 of the episode, this is one of the best episodes of the entire show. But since I have to take the last bit into account, the cheesiness. But that being said, it wasn't all cheesy. Like, again, getting into the Kira-Odo relationship, seeing Odo step into the Great Link and say goodbye to Kira, I'm not ashamed to admit I cried many times when watching that scene, or however many times I've seen that scene. I still makes me at very least teary-eyed. That was such an effective, emotionally scene. The way that she again proves that she's willing to let him go, but they don't want to say goodbye, but they know that they have to. And he puts on like the tux as he walks into the link. Oh man, that was one of the most touching scenes in the entire show, bar none. So this was a really, really great episode with some parts that are not so good, but overall, amazing episode. Anyway, all that's done. That is now season 7, so let me get into the best and worst episodes of season 7. So let's start with the worst episode. You got contenders like Take Me Out to the Holosuites, Field of Fire, The Emperor's New Cloak, but the absolute worst episode of the season is, of course, Bada Bing Bada Bang. This episode was absolutely horrendous. It was horrible. It was plot contrivance. It was rip-off. It was cliche. The characters were being dumb. It was silly. It was annoying. It was everything I hate about it. I do not want to see in Deep Space Nine. Fuck Vic Fontaine. Okay, now let me get into the best episodes of season 7. You got episodes like Treachery, Faith, and the Great River, The Siege of AR-558, Enter Amren England's Silent Ligas, The Changing Face of Evil, attacking, what's the other? Oh, What You Leave Behind. But the best episode, and Dogs of War, another contender. But the best episode of season 7 is Tacking Into the Wind. As I said, this episode was absolutely amazing. It had that real Game of Thrones feel to it. It had character development. It had the great Kira and Odo moments. It had suspense. It had the Worf killing Galran, like taking risks. Everything that showcased why serialized storytelling at the end of the series was so amazing. So my rating for Deep Space Nine Season 7 as a whole, out of 10, is a 9. Excellent. Was not a perfect season. Didn't quite earn its 10 because the first half was problematic. It had a lot of mediocre or terrible episodes, but the second half, the serialized storytelling, was magnificent. And even within that first half, you got some amazing episodes like Treachery, Faith, and the Great River, and Enter Amren England's Silent Ligas. Overall, I would say this was a really strong season, really good quality season of Deep Space Nine. One of the better seasons of Deep Space Nine. So anyway, that is it for my review of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So I have now done all 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine. Now, those who have watched my channel know that it is tradition for me at the end of my season 7 video, or the last season video of a show I review, to announce which show I'm going to do review next. That is the same format of doing one season every month, where I do one video where I review every episode of that season and release one every month. But the thing with that is that I actually started this about 2 years ago. So I did Voyager first. I did all 7 seasons of Voyager, and then I did Babylon 5. I did 5 seasons of Babylon 5, and now I did 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's been a long time getting from there to here. It's been a long while. But my time is finally near. I can see the dreams outlined. I can touch the sky. And I'm gonna review the crappy show. No, I'm not gonna change my mind. 'Cause I'm gonna review Star Trek Enterprise. Even though the 2 seasons suck. But at least the season 3 and 4 are actually pretty good, but I'm gonna trash the first 2 seasons because that song, fuck that song. Oh my god, that song sucks. Anyway, I'm gonna get all into that, where I'm gonna review. I'm going to put myself through the torture and the stress of watching every episode of the first 2 seasons of Enterprise for you guys and for me, just to see, so I can, I will have to give some ranch warnings in those first 2 seasons, but I look forward to watching season 3 and 4 again. But I have to endure those crappy 2 seasons first. Anyway, that's not going to be for another 2 months though, because as traditional, next month, or at least actually not next month, because this video is coming out really late, so it's more like 2 weeks from now. I will be doing my top 30 worst episodes of Deep Space Nine, my top 50 best episodes of Deep Space Nine, and I'm going to change things up. Because I usually do a best episodes, worst episodes, and with each show I do a third closeout video. I try to make it different for each show. For Voyager, I did the ranking all 7 seasons, which I think I don't need to do that for Deep Space Nine because I think you figured that out from all of our reviews. That from best to worst, it goes 6, 3, 7, 4, 5, 2, 1. Pretty simple. So instead, I'm going to do my top 10 best and worst reoccurring aliens. So this is for aliens who appeared maybe in just one episode or maybe a whole bunch of episodes. What were the best, what were some of the worst. That's what I'm going to do. And of course, you know, the best and worst episodes. So that's coming out in a few weeks, or for at the start of May. And then in June, I got faith in the heart, I'll be back with Enterprise. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. A very long video. If you stick through all the way in, congratulations. And yeah, so be sure to check out my channel as I do many more Star Trek videos, as well as cover other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek Discovery, The Expanse, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.